one of the disadvantages of being high in agreeableness is that you're more likely to be a target for disagreeable types.
Certainly.
And this is a really important notion. So I was talking yesterday, who was it with? I can't remember, but we were talking about, oh yes, it was Andy. No, we were talking about the establishment of this, utopian community in the middle of Seattle. The mayor described it and said, well, maybe it'll be the summer of love, which is extremely naive thing to think, especially because the summer of love blew up. And that's sort of a celebration of agreeable virtues. And so agreeable people are very generous and kind, and they're not backstabbing, and they're empathetic, and they're self-sacrificing. But there have been computer simulations, very sophisticated computer simulations by evolutionary biologists of what happens if you get agreeable people together. So imagine you have a population of people, and all of them are agreeable. And so they're cooperating away. It's all very kind and nice. But if you put one person in there who has psychopathic traits, he just takes over everything.
Yeah.
And so the agreeable people always have the problem of how do you handle free riders, cheaters, and psychopaths? Right. And you might be utopian and say, well, those people just don't exist and they shouldn't exist and we shouldn't structure our societies that way, but that ain't going to cut it because psychopaths are always 3% of the population. They vary between 1 and 5. And so if you're so is it possible, I don't want to push this interpretation beyond its reasonable limits, but I'm wondering, you're open and creative and entrepreneurial, and so that's not going to suit you for managerial or bureaucratic jobs. You don't have the temperament for that. And then you're agreeable. And so is it possible that you encountered more of that bullying behavior, or like a disproportionate amount of that bullying behavior and so forth in the jobs that you had? Is that...
I think that's very possible. And yes, and I'm also very sensitive. So I'm kind of, react a little bit more than most other people might react. But the odd thing is that the book came out in 1998 and it has resonated with lots and lots of readers. I've sold millions of copies of the book. And so I think a lot of people share the trait that I have.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. It's not uncommon what I'm talking about at all.
I mean, the great manipulators in the world, the 3% that you talk about, and I think that's about the right number, they don't need this kind of book because they're born that way, or they're not born that way, but they learned at the age of 3 or 4 or 5 how to begin to manipulate, and their whole personality was kind of formed over these sort of tactics. They don't need a book like that.
What seems to happen there, we studied that, if you take 2-year-olds and you group them together, 2-year-olds, by the way, grouped together are the most violent of human beings in
definitely.
Age-matched groups. Okay, so among 2-year-olds, there's a proportion of them who will spontaneously kick, fight, hit, bite, and steal.
Yeah.
Okay, they're almost all males, and it's about 5% of the males. Now, most of them, this goes to nature versus nurture, say, most of them get socialized out of that by the time they're 4. Now, they would be more disagreeable boys. So they're not empathic and compassionate, polite by temperament, but they can still be socialized. But a proportion of them don't get socialized, and they tend to be life course antisocial types.
Yeah, I think Melanie Klein, she looked at infants like that of that age, and she said that there was something called the greedy baby. And the greedy baby was like sucking the mother's breast so hard, it could never get enough milk. It was just so greedy for more and more. And she saw that as the child got older, that kind of greediness and that kind of selfish behavior only got worse and worse and worse. And she would try and see if you could track that to someone who became older. It was a type, and she ended up thinking that there was maybe a genetic component to this.
Yeah, well, there is a genetic component too, because that sort of proclivity runs in families. And also there's a genetic underpinning to variation in agreeableness. Now, if you have a tough kid like that, and you're very agreeable, the kid can run roughshod over you. It's very difficult for you to do the socialization. And so, like one of the problems that women face with men. So men are reliably less agreeable than women. That's cross-culturally. And it's true. It's even more true in egalitarian societies. And so women have to be agreeable because I think primarily because they have to take care of infants. And that's an extremely self-sacrificing occupation, especially when they're under 9 months. But with men, they have to select men who are agreeable enough to be generous and kind and share. but they have to be disagreeable enough to keep the real psychopaths and the manipulators at bay. And so it's a chronic problem for the human race.